Simple answer to your question is no. I've never even heard of any such thing. There is no such.
All right, y'all, it's good to have y'all here. It is May 12th, if you have lost your calendar, in 2026. And we're here for two work session items and then our first group conversation about the FY27 budget. And just because we are gluttons for this kind of good time, we're going to be back here in the same space on Thursday, May 14th. At 1 o'clock for a continued conversation about the budget. And at the bottom of everyone's sheet is a handy cheat sheet to the next few weeks of your life. I actually had to adjust my calendar on my computer because I thought we were in one more meeting even. So everybody, please take a look at that. We're going to talk about the Sandy Creek Basin in just a moment. That'll be followed by proposed updates to the purchasing ordinance and then budget discussion. But as we begin, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Public Utilities Director Hollis to introduce our guests in the room today.
Good afternoon. This is a presentation requested from Sandy Creek Basin. Our engineers, Hazen and Sawyer, has put this together, the feasibility study, and I think that's going to help Commission know where we're trying to go. And they're going to represent some of the concepts that we discussed. Turn it over to Alan.
Good morning, good afternoon. So we're here to discuss the Sandy Creek Basin and the potential alternatives we have for either extending or improving sanitary sewer within that basin. Just want to introduce myself. My name is Alan Bowling. I'm a civil engineer with an engineering firm called Hazen and Sawyer. We've been working at various levels with public utilities since the early 2000s, where we've helped you guys design and construct the Trail Creek Interceptor, which is one basin to the east from Sandy Creek. And then I've actually been working with you guys pretty heavily since about 2012, on all kinds of projects, Brooklyn Creek, and also projects after plant. Brian Jones is with me. Brian's one of our lead civils in our office in Atlanta, and has participated in doing a lot of the work here. So just wanted to introduce yourself. Thank you for having us. Just kind of introducing kind of Sandy Creek Basin. That's a term we use all the time without thinking too much about what that is. Essentially, that is the drainage area that drains to Sandy Creek. Sandy Creek is a tributary of the North Oconee River. And so really it's within what we call the North Oconee River Basin. That basin is served by your North Oconee Water Reclamation Facility, which is just south of the loop, south of campus, College Station. It's a 14 million gallon day facility, really nice facility. And then there's an existing sewer line. We call it the Upper North Oconee trunk line. It's about 3.5 mile sewer line that goes from the wastewater plant on the south side of the loop all the way through town and up towards the Sandy Creek Basin, but not into the basin. Sandy Creek, the total area we're talking about, it's about 5,800 acres, so pretty sizable, with about 2,000 some odd parcels across the basin, all the way from small lots to large ag. And then based upon available records, about 1,600 septic systems within. I don't have perfect records on that, but that gives you a sense of scale. So there's, about 1,600 existing. Y'all know this basin well. It's a mixture of you've got a major park up there and a lot of greenway property that the county has purchased over the years to develop its greenway. And of course, you've got you've got a fair bit of ag in the north part and the edge of the county, and then, various aspects of commercial industrial. Most of the residential in the basin is zoned, I think you guys call it maybe AR25. It's just your standard half acre lot. So that's kind of the sort of existing conditions there. Some background here. This is as far back as I know. I don't know what happened before 2010, but y'all's every 5 years, you guys have a service delivery plan that PUD puts together that helps plan out really a 20-year horizon. I think you're in the process of approving the 2025. I didn't have that up here because it's still in process. In the 2010 service delivery plan, there was a specific letter and a directive from your predecessors to essentially remove Sandy Creek Basin from consideration for sewer. And so that was, I'm sure there was reasons for that kind of predated me, but that's where I kind of started helping you guys. At 2015, we ended up meeting with y'all when we were updating the 2015 service delivery plan 10 years ago, 11 years ago, probably. And you know, at least we're recognizing that there was some concern about the impact of possibly some aging infrastructure, some aging septic amongst those 1,600 septic systems. And so at that time in the 2015 and really again in the 2020, the directive from y'all, when y'all approved those service delivery plans then, was to evaluate the issue and identify potential solutions, but it was just really more of an assessment level. And that's what we've done to date, is just look at assessing. So part of what we're here to do is just maybe bring you up to speed or introduce kind of the things we've done over the last, mostly this last year, but in other times as well. What you do see on the right side is it's just an excerpt from your 2020 plan. Obviously, that's about to be out of date when you approve your 2025, but you kind of see some hot spots of where septic systems are. And just to orient you in the county, the pink top middle with the biggest hot spot, that's kind of the hot spot of that is the Sandy Creek Basin with the septic systems there. So really looking at what alternatives or what opportunities do we have to either make improvements to existing systems or possibly extend new sewer in the basin. So there's a lag there. So just to give you more information that you may or may not want to have, like, you know, we kind of looked at as many different things as we could think of. You know, there's a handful of tools in your tool belt. Your most traditional is what we're all familiar with, just typical gravity sewer. This is PUD's heart and soul on the sewer side, is extending gravity systems to properties to like this sewer. Oftentimes there's a connection where a developer will do a portion of that work. That's part of their responsibility when they develop property. And then it ties into an existing or maybe an extension of PUD's sewer systems. Oftentimes those are generally running along creeks and rivers because that's the low point. And that's what happens. Gravity wants to drain things downhill. A second alternative is a pressure sewer system. Y'all are very fortunate compared to a lot of utilities around the state. Y'all have very few of these, which is ideal. But essentially, there are times where you cannot connect from point A to point B. There's something in the way. Maybe that's a property issue or just or environmental sensitive area. There could be a reason that you do not want to build gravity all the way down the hill. And so instead, you'll build a pump station and you'll collect it on site and then you'll pump it. And then you have a lot more flexibility. When you choose to pump something, you can turn left and right, up and down because you're imparting that energy. Instead of using gravity, you're using power to move sewage. So that's an alternative, and you'll have a small number of those in the county. A third one, and I'm just mentioning this because it's something we evaluated. You do have, there are what's called package treatment plants. That's kind of an unofficial name. It's just an on-site treatment facility. You'll see these. They're around a lot more than you realize. They're a lot of times around private developments. Maybe there's if you're down on a coastline area and you've seen maybe a built-up sort of a nice resort, they may have something there because they're looking at treating it on site. Or if you're in a really rural area and you just are not able to connect. That is not common, and we did not spend too much time on that. You would actually have a very difficult time within Clarke County getting that permitted through the state because you have treatment facilities. So while that is an alternative and a method that can be done, it's not incredibly feasible currently. Those are all publicly owned facilities, and then we kind of also looked at privately owned. So the most sort of natural one you're going to think about is what we currently have, which is 1,600 some odd, and then many thousands of others around the county, which is just your standard on-site septic system. That is, you've got a piece of property, you got a house, maybe a commercial establishment. You generally have some piece of land, maybe it's a backyard or a side yard where you're going to have a tank and then what's called a drain field that basically spreads out your sewage in a manner that is safe to discharge back into the ground. There's millions of these around the world. And, so that's there. Another alternative that can be privately owned that you do not have here in the county, and it's not really that common in the state, is community septic systems. So you could do the same thing where maybe you had a lot of times we think of this as like a subdivision. You have a subdivision where everybody is draining, but instead of draining to a county gravity line for any number of reasons, you could build a larger collective sewer septic system. And there's some advantages to that. There's some efficiencies and disadvantages as well. I also mentioned package plants in there twice. I realize I have that on here twice because many times package plants are actually privately owned. They have their own contracts, their own legal responsibilities, their own permits with the states and whatnot. So while I'm repeating myself, we didn't necessarily spend a lot of time on that because I think you'd have a really difficult time getting that permitted through the state. We just wanted to fully acknowledge that these are things you could build in Sandy Creek Basin or anywhere else in the county. As we did this, if you look on the right-hand side, we asked ourselves, what are the things we're trying to assess to maybe try to evaluate which of these alternatives makes the most sense or is most appropriate is probably the right way of looking at it. So first and foremost is our commitment, both PUD's commitment, Hazen's commitment to protect water quality. That's a core fundamental commitment. It's also a permit requirement that Athens-Clarke County Public Utilities has as a commitment to Georgia EPD. And so that is really thinking about your groundwater and your surface water to ensure that we're protecting that. Adjacent to that, a little different, is just what we broadly call environmental stewardship. In y'all's documentation, a lot of times it's referred to as environmentally sensitive areas, and just doing or evaluating ways to protect environmentally sensitive areas as much as possible. I kind of view it as like for kind of a conservationist mindset. A third area is identifying and supporting future development, and I recognize that there are varying degrees of interest in that, but you have to sort of recognize that depending on future development, that may impact which tool in your toolbox you want to use, right? There's some tools that are more appropriate for less development, and some tools that are more appropriate for more development. And then finally, and this probably comes from just the engineers and us, reliability, redundancy, resiliency, and same thing for public utilities. Y'all's water and sewer group there, I've worked with utilities all over the state. They are some of the absolute best. They take their job very seriously. They care a ton. They work crazy hours to make sure that your systems are reliable and resilient. Finally, we do look at cost. I think at this stage, cost is a little tricky because there's hundreds of unknowns, and so it's very difficult to compare apples to apples at this stage. But generally speaking, we try to evaluate capital cost, which is like upfront cost, things you're paying for the year of construction, versus long-term operations and maintenance. Can't imagine that you can read this, but I think you have printouts, and I'm not going to go through this specifically. But essentially, if you think about what we tried to do is for the four main things we looked at, because we kind of dropped packaged plants from consideration, which is basically gravity sewers, kind of the traditional bread and butter, what PUD does, pressurized systems, lift stations and force mains, another tool that PUD has in its tool belt, versus centralized septic systems, kind of a community septic system, or decentralized, which is the most common. And without going through all the details of that, we tried to provide pluses and minuses of each of those. And the reality is there are advantages and disadvantages to each type of technology that you use. And which ones you might argue or maybe determine is most appropriate for a circumstance. I'm happy, maybe towards the end, if there's questions, I'm happy to touch on these, but it would be very difficult to read them all in real time. Approaching. So one of the things we try to think about is, this is not this is not an undeveloped basin, right? So you've got sort of two things to think about. You've got, entire neighborhoods and other developments, existing developments, and trying to understand what would be an appropriate solution or an appropriate, I would say, plan and goal for supporting existing systems versus proposed developments. And those, they may end up with the same solutions, but depending on your priorities, you can end up making different decisions. And so I'll actually go proposed first. Generally speaking, for public utilities outside of this basin, because this basin has kind of been off limits for a couple decades, when a proposed development within Athens-Clarke County comes forward, pretty much everywhere else in the county, it is the responsibility of the developer coordinating with PUD to extend sewer to that property and across that property. And on occasion, with permission, we may have a developer install a lift station and force main where they can't connect by gravity, but that's sort of an exception. And I would just say that's for all practical purposes, that's the status quo for how public utilities works across Clarke County. That doesn't really apply here as much because there's not sewer in the basin. So, I think you would have to decide for proposed developments, if anybody wanted to build in the basin, what you would want to do. And I realize that's one of the reasons we're here, is to sort of continue that conversation. On the left-hand side, and hopefully, I guess you can see this on your screen or your printouts, what do you do in Sandy Creek with what I'm calling existing development? Generally, that means existing houses, sometimes existing neighborhoods, sometimes existing mobile home parks, and whatnot. And what do you do with those? And, where you have concern that a septic system isn't functioning correctly, they do require maintenance. I think that's a challenge. I don't know of anything that doesn't require maintenance, even though we sometimes we forget that. That's a challenge of a septic system, is that it's a little out of sight, out of mind. That's true actually with gravity systems. It's true of everything. We are very fortunate that we live most days without having to think about sewer. And so, but one consideration is, with existing developments, what could you do to improve existing septic systems? The other would be is, if you didn't want to improve an existing septic system, or could it, how could you connect that individual home or septic system to another solution, right? Whether, you could connect it to one of PUD's existing gravity lines, or you could choose to find some land and build a community septic system. There might be opportunities for that. And the last time I'm gonna mention this, but just because I wanted to be thorough, or you could actually, you could maybe take one of your neighborhoods that had a bunch of septic in it, and you could choose to install a package plant. I will say, if you were to take, depending on how the existing neighborhood, I'll just use neighborhood, kind of an easy term, is depending on that neighborhood's laid out, it would be varying degrees of complexity. Some might work out easy. They've got nice, it's got some slope to it. Everything would fit. There's enough room between houses to connect, to a new technology. But others could be a lot more complicated. And, depending on how close they are to be built together and how disruptive that could be, there's lots of considerations on that. And that's one of the reasons it makes it difficult to provide like just a broad cost estimate, because it's very, very specific. You can end up, it just depends on the circumstance. So I just wanted to go back, look at this from a different angle. Just, for those people who have septic systems on site, that's, you basically generally have what's on the left. We call it a septic tank. It's like a big concrete tank. An older one could have been brick, depending on how old it is. And your house is draining into that. There's a couple of walls in between it that basically slowly, that holds the sewage in there for a while, and a lot of microbial activity that helps clean the sewage out. And then it drains out into what you see on the right side, which is called a drain field, which is a series of pipes that spread out across your yard. Those pipes have holes in them that slow, almost like a soaker, like those soaker things they sell at Home Depot that don't work real well. It's almost like that. It just slowly releases that water. And what you're trying to do is release the water across a wide area so that it doesn't create wet spots, which would, could create problems. It is very common that the drain field is something that can fail over time, just because eventually the soil stops its ability to absorb, basically that sewage finds its way to creeks instead of into the groundwater, and that can be a challenge. Also recognizing septic tanks require maintenance. I think an unfortunate, consideration, people just assume it's set it, forget it, but the reality is that if you're a homeowner with a septic system, you should have a little pocket of money off to the side so that every 3 to 5 years, you're paying a septic company to come out there and pump out that tank. And when you don't do that, it creates problems downstream.
And also, if people don't know where their septic field is, they start parking on it and different things like that. There's a lot to it.
There is, and I'll mention this. I said earlier, a significant portion of the residential zoning up there is half-acre lots. By today's most septic systems are managed at the state level through the Department of Health. Can't remember the exact name of that state department, but it goes through the health department. It is almost impossible to get a septic system on a half-acre lot today. We all learned lessons. What you could permit in 1950, then you couldn't permit in 1980, and what you could permit in 1980, you can't permit today. You recognize that now in a new septic system, you have to have room for your septic system, but you actually have to have room for a completely new one in case yours fails. So you have to, when you're building new development with septic, you are required to have enough room for a backup. You don't have to install it on day one, but if something goes wrong, you can back up. And that's really challenging on what you'll have some areas in this basin that are T90 lots, and there's no room for a lot of that. Won't get too deep. There are, I'll talk a little bit of, on the right side was just the concept of a community system. You can kind of imagine that instead of you having a system, you and all your neighbors get together and have a larger one. There's some efficiencies on that. That can be really tricky to retrofit because you have to find property, and usually that property already has homes on it. On the left side, there are systems where you can collect it at the house and essentially pump it to a larger collection system. It's where you might have each home. Let's say you have a neighborhood of 50 houses. Every home would have its own little pump instead of going to its septic system, and it would pump it out to a new line and go down to the front entrance of the neighborhood to be dealt with there. We call those low pressure systems. It's just low pressure at the house. It's not high pressure, what you would see in a county system. A lot of these are retrofitted. You'll see these systems oftentimes like up in mountain communities where, it's very difficult to install septic systems on the side of mountains. And so, there's these retrofitted options. So there's an option that exists from a technology standpoint that could be a tool in your tool belt that would collect it at each home. That could be its own challenge. Like, I don't want to pretend otherwise. You got to make a connection on each home. You have to get approval at the homeowner level. You have to decide who's paying for what and who's maintaining all those things. But that is a technology there.
Are these mostly new developments? Like if you're building, would it be a little easier?
Well, it's definitely, everything is easier with new developments. I mean, I know new developments have their own downstream consequences, but like in terms of this, yes. But these low, I would call it low pressure sewer, if I was just giving it a generic term. This is a doable method for connecting and removing somebody off of a septic system and maybe capturing a group of homes. And you still got to do something with it when you get it, but you're at least collecting all 50 homes into one location, and you can decide what to do with it then. I think about this about 10 years ago. My kids were getting big, and so we renovated the basement and dug a big hole in the slab and put a little pump to collect it and pumped it to the street. And you can buy those things at Home Depot. They're all kits. This is a little bit more complicated than that, but it's the same idea. If you've ever had a basement where you've had a little pump in your basement to be able to pump to the street, it's a little bit nicer version of that. You need it to be nicer version because it is, you want to make sure it's done correctly, but it's the same kind of concept. And then I'll mention this. That's on the right. This is just a generic, example. This is kind of a county-owned, a PUD-owned lift station. So what a lift station would be is just this on a much larger level. It's a relatively large tank that's in the ground that collects sewage, and then a series of pumps and electrical systems and everything else will take that and pump it wherever you want to go. You could pump it a half mile, you could pump it 10 miles. Obviously, that can get complicated, but this is the kind of thing. Whereas on the left, you might see something that's at the homeowner level, right? Which is maybe 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And on the right is something that you probably put on its own quarter-acre parcel, that takes its own property and has its own maintenance responsibilities and maintenance requirements that PUD would do. So I just wanted to put these next to each other to kind of just talk about different types of solutions. And then we'll skip this. This is just, okay. All right. I wanted to kind of zoom in and talk a little bit. I was broadly talking about just tools in the tool belt that you have the option of. Now let's kind of talk about Sandy Creek. What you see here is you've got the loop, and then that's MLK going north-south, kind of in the yellow. And the existing sewer ends just inside the loop. So what you see over on the left side is your beach and water plant, your meter management, water sewer. It's all back there. It's behind what's just to the east of the chicken plants there off of the Barber Street area. And that green line represents the sewer. So coming straight down that page is that 3.5 mile sewer line that goes all the way to North Oconee plant. And that's y'all's line. Y'all have easements, y'all have ownership, PUD maintains it. And then actually there's a relatively new crossing of the river that's very secure, very safe, very well built, designed to withstand the river, and so that everything's safe there. But that's basically where things stop. And that construction probably finished around 2010, and that's as far as it got. But that's essentially where, if you wanted to tie in sewer from the Sandy Creek Basin, this is where you'd be tying it in. And you can see there, Sandy Creek is actually about an 0.8 of a mile up the river. It's hard to see the river on the aerial just because there's so many trees, and the river is greenish, just like the trees are, so it kind of blends in. But the river's there, it snakes all through up there, and then it starts snaking all over the place. It's so flat. So about 0.8 of a mile up from there. Zooming out real quick, one of the challenges of the basin is not just that it's big, but it's very flat. And it is, you know this because if you've ever been through there, that's one of the reasons you have so much greenway through there. Is there's a lot of standing water, wetlands, waterways because of how flat it is. It is flatter than you can build sewer, meaning you have to build sewer with a little bit of slope to keep your sewage flowing, right? And you can flatten it only so much. You build a dead flat, then it's not going anywhere, and you got problems. And so the reality of the basin is that it is too flat to build sewer all the way up the basin. Not that y'all want to, I'm just talking about it just to understand. So from the get-go, you recognize that if you were to want to put sewer here, you're going to have to look at this in pieces. And so we'll do that next. Okay. So we kind of identified what a name we just made up. So not a completely unofficial name of just the lower Sandy Creek Basin. That's just a made up name. And it kind of gets you up to basically where Nowhere and Freeman hit. On that map, and I hate it, on the right side is it Dawsonville Road? Danielsville. I knew as soon as I said that I was pausing. Dawsonville from Dawsonville, I'm sorry. Danielsville Road. And then basically, on the left is Sandy Creek. And so we kind of looked, and you can see a green line there. It's just trying to understand, how far up Sandy Creek could we install gravity sewer, right? Not that we are, but we just understand what could we do. And we're relatively confident with just the information we have that we could build that up into this basin. And, effectively, that would open up that basin to connect to gravity sewer. It's about 1,000 acres. From our records, there's about 450 septic systems on there. My gut is there's more because we feel like there's some gaps in the records, but at least gives you a sense of scale of how many septic systems are existing. And one of the hardest parts of doing this, but would be super critical, is we actually have to cross the loop. And Georgia DOT is responsible for that loop and has some pretty strict standards for how you cross it. It's not a simple job. And so there's a pretty major expense associated with crossing that. But we kind of looked here and said, if we were going to connect to the existing sewer that's down there off the Greenway, kind of across the river from the water plant, and take it up here, it's about 14,000 feet, so not quite 3 miles, and planning level estimate about $25 million. A good portion of that is actually crossing the North Loop. Now that's just giving, I'd call it the bones, like the skeleton. That's just getting sewer in there. That's not going and connecting to your property and connecting to your property and doing those connections. So that would be almost impossible to predict at this point because we don't know where we would be connecting to. Further up the basin, just calling it Upper Sandy Creek, is the upper portion of the basin, about 3,000 acres. And the reality is it's two separate basins. The east side is Sandy Creek. It kind of keeps going up Sandy Creek. You can kind of see the lake up top, the big red, or excuse me, pink, Betchel's large park. And that creek keeps going up, past the county line. And that's, we're looking at about 160 septic systems, probably more than that. Another 19,000 feet, probably another 3+ miles of sewer line. And then what I mentioned here, plus the lift station. This is a portion that you would have to, at some point, to install a pressure lift station to pump over. Because it's too flat. You wouldn't be able to connect this basin, this little sub basin, to the rest of your gravity system if that was something you wanted to do. Then you have on the right side, I assume it's Nokechi Creek, Nokechi. I knew I was gambling on that. And another 500-600 septic systems over there. Similar length, which doesn't surprise you, and I've got lift station there. It's possible that one could connect by gravity. We honestly just don't have enough information at this time to be able to really know that. It's so flat through here that it's really tricky to tell. But we kind of just, tried to look just your standard, what would we do if we were extending sewer into this basin and what would that look like? And trying to give PUD an estimate of just building that initial trunk line that other people might choose to connect to. And not to be forgotten, we actually have the west side of Sandy Creek as well. And so it's Commerce Highway, essentially Commerce Highway function as the high point. So that's this side of the Commerce Highway, it drains down to Sandy Creek. It doesn't have any sewer. And, it's a decent sized area. It's 900 acres. There's a lot more commercial, obviously, in this area. And so there's, potential there. If you wanted to have traditional sewer, if that was on one of the tools you wanted to use, it's about 20,000 foot of sewer plus a lift station that would end up being pumped into the North Oconee Basin. Pause. All right. I have one last slide. Go ahead. Sorry. I meant to be hidden. Okay. Yeah, not totally sure where this goes. Just trying to talk through, one of the goals was to bring you up to speed on different tools in the tool belt, recognizing that there's different things you could do. I think one of the major questions that we obviously would want to hear from y'all is where you would want to prioritize anything at all. And I think there's a big difference if you were saying we want to prioritize improvements to existing systems, right? Or are we prioritizing providing sewer for potential new development? And those can be the same solutions, but they also could be very different. They could have very different, they could come up with, depending on that priority, you could have a different perspective on what you'd like to do. And then the second question is, are you interested in making improvements to a portion of the basin over the overall basin? And again, I think that impacts how you would choose to go about it. Like if you said, I only, have this targeted area of the basin and we really want to find a solution for this 400 acres out of the 6,000, that might be a different solution. That probably would be a different solution than if you said, we want to solve this for all 6,000 acres. And then depending on y'all's input and directive to PUD, probably the next step for PUD would, take this. Right now, we've been kind of evaluating things like at 10,000 feet, maybe even 15,000 feet, really high level GIS, driving with our car around town to just kind of get a perspective on it. Depending on the directive that you provided PUD, next steps would be, I would say slightly more detailed engineering. The value of that is to be able to give you specifics rather than talking. Right now, everything's been discussed very, very generally, where you'd be able to identify specific challenges, specific improvements, and specific costs. So
It's helpful, Alan. I appreciate it. And obviously it's been a topic of like a very long conversation over the course of a couple of decades. Been here since 2006. So that's quite a bit of that. I just, want to go ahead and for the benefit of the public and kind of our engineering partners, sort of contain the conversation effectively. And so I think it's fair to say that, the area of interest was really that lower Sandy Creek Basin, generally defined by Freeman Drive and Bowling Drive. That includes Fowler Elementary School and the Hope Project, for example. We're really not talking about, as I understand it, and certainly don't put the words in your mouth, we're really not talking about that upper Sandy Creek or the Nikichi Creek areas so much as we are that kind of area where, as you described, Alan, effectively, we've just got a bunch of these half-acre parcels, often duplexes on them, so two families on a half-acre parcel. Certainly a couple of undeveloped parcels, the Hope one is an example, or the Bowley Drive 441 parcel, or some undeveloped components of that, but a lot of this is built out. So I mean, is that fair to say for everybody, kind of as they've kind of participated in these conversations? All right. So that's at least a helpful level set in terms of containing the discussion. But certainly interested in everybody's kind of thoughts or feedback. And so I know I've got Allison and Melissa.
Well, just to clarify, that has to be done first because it's the connecting point, right? I mean,
Well, and I'm suggesting not only first, but
to set,
solely.
yes. I mean, I'm barely even that, but forward. Like you said, condensing the discussion, that covers, I appreciated the divvying up that you did, because I think the last time I studied it for previous plans, it was all together, which I can put together with this, but I appreciated the breakdown on the 4 segments and those details. I think that's, and the cost for this, but anyway, yes.
Melissa.
So when we're talking about extending the sewer line, are we talking about along the creek, digging up installation underground alongside the creek bed? Removing tree canopy, removing vegetation for what would probably be 25-35 foot corridor?
Yeah, so I would, so I'll answer your second part and first. So generally speaking, if you're going to install a new sewer, there's just, I would say, a common corridor width is just a 40-foot width.
40 foot.
It can be narrower, and oftentimes it can be narrower. It's just, narrower is just makes it more difficult to construct. So usually we start at 40 and then we narrow it based upon constraints. It can be as narrow as 20, but it gets a little bit more, it just physically gets more difficult to build. So I'm going to answer the question about the creek in a second. So I was just trying to give you a sense of that. So oftentimes, if you're building a new sewer line, like we did Trail Creek almost 20 years ago, you would probably generally do a 40-foot corridor. Oftentimes that 20-foot, you end up keeping 20 of that. Like, so that PUD needs that 20 forever for
20
maintenance.
maintains unvegetated.
20 is maintained unvegetated. They'll come in through it and mow it down every once in a while. The other 20, depending on lots of discussions, y'all's default is to replant it. The default is to replant it. At a minimum, it's going to get replanted with grass, but your default is to replant it with trees. Sometimes you end up negotiating it with the property owner. What do they want? What do they want? And so then the second question was specific to this. We have flown at kind of at 10,000 foot level. We've done some spot checking on the ground level, or I have, looking at things like, I don't think anything is going to be on the creek. It's such a wide area of floodplain. It's what we're kind of showing is really kind of hugging the floodplain to try to get away from water as much as we can. You don't really, it's not preference to build sewage in a floodplain where you can help it at least. I mean, you got to do what you got to do sometimes depending on things. But and at this level, I don't have like an alignment that would say this is, we're just looking at a large level. But we do take, there's sort of a balance. You take into consideration, how to protect environmentally sensitive areas versus, building the same line up the hill could be a lot more destructive because you're having to do a ton of excavation. So there's Usually at the preliminary stage, we end up doing multiple alignments and we walk multiple alignments with utility and say, here's the pluses and minuses. Depending on who the property owner is, you might like show them the different alignment options.
So, Sandy Creek is pretty pristine and it runs into the Oconee River right where our drinking water comes out.
Right.
Also, I'm not sure if y'all are aware, but right over the county line on Sandy Creek is a golf course and luxury housing development going in, which is going to severely impact that creek. That vegetation along Sandy Creek, helps filter it from any runoff that is coming from the basin. My concern is, removing all of that vegetation and the environmental impact of that will impact the creek. I mean, we're already getting environmental impacts from the septic. I'm weighing all those factors on top of each other. Would we be doing more damage to the creek and to the corridor in general?
Sure.
Losing all that tree canopy. I'm also curious to know about the trunk line going up Highway 29 and Danielsville Road. Is there a possibility of looking at a line that would connect into that trunk?
So Danielsville is also kind of a high point.
Yeah.
So nothing will naturally drain to Danielsville because it's actually the high point. I mean, everything falls away from it.
So it's,
You can pump to it. And so that would be one. So what's shown here, this is tricky because I could have shown 14 different slides with different solutions and, what's shown here is a broad concept of what a gravity line could look like. Fully recognizing that we would, I think PUD has an interest to stay away from the creek because it's just really wet and it's not ideal. And you want to install a sewer line in a place that you can do maintenance in the future. And so we would actually want to build it up into what I would call uplands, away from the wetlands, away from the backwater. A different solution would be, to build one or more pumping systems around in the basin. And then, whether you pump it up Danielsville, so kind of the very right of that slide, that's the Trail Creek Basin. So you can pump it up to the top of the hill and let it fall to the Trail Creek Basin. Not all those lines were sized with this in mind. So you got to be, you don't have unlimited options, but there is capacity in that basin that you could pump it at the top of the hill and let it go down into Trail Creek. And then it would still go down into the trunk line. It'd still go to North Oconee plant and from that perspective.
so we currently have lines that are failing that are impacting tens of thousands. Wood Hills, Forest Heights area, we've got East Athens, really dense in-town places that we're encouraging development because they're already developed. This $5 million that we're talking about here, $25 million that we're talking about here would be diverted from, efforts to improve those lines and continue that in-town development, correct?
It would not necessarily be diverted. It could result in an increased rate in order to be added so that you don't divert.
So
if you kept the rates the
regardless, we'd have
same,
to increase everybody's.
if you kept the rates the same, it could divert another project. If you increase the rates, it would just be added to. And that would be true with anything that's not in the service delivery plan, that if you wanted to add to the service delivery plan.
I mean, I feel like before we continue this conversation, we need to truly understand the environmental impact and the loss of community and what that would look like for, the people who live in that area, who specifically live in that area because they want to enjoy that green space. And a real understanding of what the cost would be for the entire community as far as ratepayers.
And sort of the fiscal outgrowth of this is, potentially borrowing $200 million rather than $150 million. I mean, there's a sliding scale there. We generally have pursued these service delivery plans with kind of a large bonded indebtedness package. We at times in my tenure here have had north of $300 million of bonded indebtedness through utilities. And of course, that's a revenue bond because people are paying their bills every month. And so it's not like a general obligation debt. So functionally, that's what we'd be talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to have some discussions with, the environmental community scientists, hydrologists, understanding the impacts on the creek and on our drinking water and how, that upstream development is impacting the creek, and are we just gonna be adding to the problem? Yeah, I mean, the drinking water of the entire county comes out of this specific area.
Okay.
I do want to make, a comment about Commissioner, Link's point about the golf course. One of my constituents is here, and he did notice problems, and he had to go through staff to get with EPD. So there is an awareness and there is a concern about that kind of development being this close to Athens-Clarke County, which we probably wouldn't have known about if Troy hadn't been on that. Now, I'm going to speak about my district because Commissioner Link also brought up about the other areas that do not have sewer. We proudly look forward to 300,000 people moving here in the next 30,000 people moving here in the next 10 years. And if that is the case, and we're having sewer problems or sewer issues now, we're going to have to pay or do something ahead of this migration of folk moving to Athens. Now, as far as people like living out in the, in the country and in those areas, which is primarily and is not in the city areas, I think one of the things that I have found, and somebody needs to take responsibility for it, is that the maintenance and the checkups are not regulated by nobody. Unless code enforcement or the state finds out. So I've had three septic overflows in my district. Matter of fact, one was right next door to me. But if you want to do all of this stuff about checking downtown and seeing all those, I wish these are the kind of conversations we had before now, when we in the district, in my district, want to do something. I have not heard anybody talk about septic or sewer lines in my 8 years on this commission. And now that it becomes an issue, not an issue, becomes a conversation, I'm gonna be upfront. I have no problems with septic tanks, I have no problem. I don't even have a choice. But I do have a problem when folk in District 9 are not, or have not been, but I think Commissioner Bright said, don't even know where your septic tank is at. And we contaminate areas by the time they get fixed. So I do like that you did break this down in the 3 parts. That makes it a little bit easier to understand. And I said I wasn't going to say this, but I will. This conversation comes about after promises that were made for all of Athens. I'm not going to just say the African-American community. And now that folk are kind of speaking up and they want, somebody needs to be held accountable about this. And it's amazing when it comes to communities of color, how this becomes a serious issue. Again, Commissioner Link, if you knew all those areas were having problems in downtown or center town, these are the things that we should be talking about, but this is the first. So again, I like the package plan. I like the breakdown. I do agree with Commissioner Link, some more conversations. I got constituents that bring resources. Not that I don't trust you guys, but I got constituents that are very educated, and we need to be finding something that a win-win situation for everyone. But when we get into, we got to do this, we got to bring that, we got to do this. Look at the reason why we don't have sewer. It's and Melissa said it, she said it, but I got folk in my district that have learned how to live with faulty septic tanks. Help me fix that. And it also seems that whatever we do, we're going to need a lift station. Is that what I heard?
I think it's feasible to construct gravity sewer through this lower area up through kind of the nowhere Freeman intersection, where you wouldn't have to have a lift station. But it really, I think it depends on.
Sounds like it requires more analysis.
It just depends on, if you said, I only want to service this one parcel in the middle of this, well, then you're going to build a small station for the middle of it. You said, no, I want to possibly replace septic systems across the whole area, then you'd have a different perspective. You'd say, well, let's build a gravity line to pick that up.
Next.
Couple of questions. From a technology standpoint, and having done this over the last 20 years, how safe now, and I think the public need to know, how safe now are things that we installing, if we want to install something, what they would look like from an environmental perspective and how to protect the environment. And second, to my colleague's sort of point, everybody's talking about we need more density, more density, more density. You're willing to slam more density in established neighborhoods, which is going to take up more septic and water. But when we talk about expanding out, to her point, it's an issue. And I got problems with that. So still a lot of work to be done. I think technology has improved 100%. I like the fact that we can sort of parcel this out and maybe concentrate on certain areas and still not impact the environment. And I think it's important. Don't get me wrong, it's really important. But to Commissioner Thornton's point, every time we want to go into areas of color, it's an issue. But yet we say, let's do more density in these neighborhoods. So to our point, more people are moving in. You want to build more housing or more cottages or more duplexes. It's the same type of impact on your systems. So we got to figure out, not only as a commission and as a community, do we want more density? We want more or whatever, and do we want to help those people that are on septic systems to get off septic systems and get on sewer and water systems that will protect them and help them. So I think, for me, is that a moral issue? We try to help these individuals. And what should we do as a government, as a commission, and as a community? Because I think we need to involve them, but I think we need to be realistic. We throw these words out about what we want to do. By the time to start looking at stuff, everybody throws their hand up and say, whoa, 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 not in my backyard. So we got to figure out what we want to do moving forward as a community, as a commission.
We got Carol and back to Allison.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, and with respect, I'm not quite sure. I'm just talking about facts. Forget about what I want or not. If you're building in town where there is capacity, you don't have to build new water lines, sewer. I understand there needs.
We had, I don't mean to cut you off, Carol, but we had to do it when we did the arena. We had to add.
No, right. Well, that's why I just said that, except for places where there isn't, and we have to fix them. So that's that. But the other thing is, at the end of this, there's a question about, are we trying to fix the septic tanks or new development or both, which I think are good questions to be looking at here. I'm a little concerned if I go back to that page 15, just in terms of, let's say we're trying to deal with the septic situation with the line, and this is just factual. I'm not even looking at the environment here. I'm looking at the factual here. If we look to that, to get over to the lines, let's say I have a house up on Freeman Drive and some duplexes, and to connect are we talking about like to connect down to that sewer line? Are we talking about as a community or like with the county, would there be lines coming off of this green thing that the county would pay for? I mean, so I'm up here on a duplex and I know that like in my neighborhood where we have septic, if I want to connect up to close to where there is a line, I have to pay for that whole line. And so that's, you know, that's actually a lot of money in my neighborhood. So are we planning on having any branch lines coming out that would be the county? That's just one question.
And ultimately, that would end up being also a policy decision because typically, as was explained, what we're building out are the trunk lines. So kind of the skeleton, as was said earlier, with normally the expectation that growth and development is expanding those smaller collector lines out further. Or if somebody's in close proximity and is wanting to take a system offline, they may be connecting into that piece. It doesn't mean that you couldn't, as a part of a project, actually expand that network so that now you're not only building the trunk lines, you're building the collector lines, and on up through almost literally to kind of the front door. We approach water a little bit differently than wastewater. Obviously, it just adds cost associated.
Well, and so, you know, whether or not, I mean, there's something that like, if we're trying to deal with the septic and we're trying to get to the septic at the houses on Freeman Drive, just using that street, for example, I don't know where they all are, but is like I mean, I want to know how much it would cost to add in some branch lines, if that's something, or if you weren't doing that, and I lived up here, what would the cost be? Because there's one thing building these lines, but if I'm looking at something and it's like, I can, you know, personally pay for 10,000 to get I don't know, clean it out or whatever, but I'm talking about 30,000, that's a different thing. So I think that's something we have to be, we just have to be factual about, because if we want to help the homeowners and the environment with the septic system, we have to be looking at what we're actually can follow through and get done. Having that that line there and not being able to connect to it doesn't do anything to improve the septic system.
Yeah, I think it's fairly safe to say that if the utility project only included a trunk line interceptor running into this watershed, it will do essentially little to nothing to actually get those homes that are currently on septic connected. I mean,
that's
practically you have to get closer to those homes, given all kinds of reasons to getting there and stuff. So I think if we did take this step, if there was a desire to advance on more feasibility analysis with this, it would need to include, okay, what would the cost, $25 million to get the trunk line in here? What would the additional cost be to expand that network out?
And can we get a cost on how much the next step of feasibility would cost? And then also on the cost of this overall, the 25 million, does that include land costs, right of way acquisition?
It would.
It does, or I mean,
Yes, ma'am. I mean,
are there estimates in there? Is there a line? Yeah, okay, okay.
And of course, that 25 million is sort of a lumpy.
yeah, it's
Right, so I mean.
usually on my end, I want to be careful. Is like, I want to give you guys a sense of scale,
Right.
right? And yeah, that's a cost including this.
So, but back to the original question of what we're trying to do here. If we're trying to, for the new development, for the septic, I think that's a discussion to be had as well. So that we understand, I mean, that we would need that to know that for the next step of the feasibility, I would assume.
The other kind of fiscal piece I'll note is that some communities, when they've got comparable questions and they've got low-income residents who need to connect to new kind of trunk lines or secondary lines, that they may use CDBG dollars, federal dollars to fund those connections. So that's just what you see out there in the world.
Legally on that one, just, and then I'll be quiet, but legally on that one, can you do that? Is that a program that?
Federal dollars, so you don't have to say.
Well, no, that isn't my question. My question is, can you limit that to a certain geographic area? Because there's so many people in other areas that don't have it? That's a question legally I was wondering about as well.
You could definitely pick. I mean, one, it has to be either an eligible population and or an eligible area to begin with, because CDBG has to go to folks that are limited income or some other categories. And yes, you absolutely could say, we're going to target an area of the community for whatever reason and focus the investments in those locations, as long as the other conditions are met.
Again, knowing that, having an estimate of how much would be needed, because we don't really get that much in CDBG funds.
Correct. I think you're
So,
typically you're going to get a couple $1 million
yeah.
a year for all of our CDBG housing programs and so on. So, yeah.
Allison, and then maybe Melissa.
Just to continue to clarify the complexity, can we get back to your slide 11? Being a visual communicator, I work better with the picture up there. So the trunk is the big circle, and that's visualizing the gravity that we're talking about across that whole map, which is why that first basin, Kelly, that you're asking us to focus on has the gravity at the level that you've researched it. So then you take a new development, they're going to be putting, whoever's building is going to be paying for all the pipe up until the property line, right? And then the property line to the trunk is us or the property owner kind of thing. No,
The developer usually takes it from the
takes
trunk.
it to the trunk.
Yeah, all
Okay.
the way to the trunk.
So that carols a little bit of what you were talking about, how far to get to the trunk. And then can you go to the next one? I don't want to get to back one, sorry. Back to the graphic of the hookup. So if somebody's existing with sewer and that trunk is, the gold color pipe is now what we're talking about adding, that's several $1,000s to bypass their sewer and get to the trunk, right? And we're talking about that cost for each person who maybe doesn't even have the $500 to clean up the septic, of which I do talk about a great deal because it does concern me. And the limits that our health department have on the preventative, it's an outreach thing versus a robust campaign. Yeah, and that sort of thing. And then, maybe we could take some of that CD money. I mean, it would be great if we could have some money now to help those people with the maintenance of their septic, because this discussion is one thing and execution is years and years and years down the road because of the work that we are currently doing on the existing sewers that need repair to continue to have it functioning where it is.
Those of us in the public sector world often say we're planting trees in whose shade we're never going to enjoy, and there's no more apt illustration than what we're talking about right now.
I do appreciate this presentation.
Yeah, I do.
It would have been helpful when we were trying to understand that project that was on the agenda. Remember, it came out and then the rainy weather version of it, and I think the graphic.
Melissa and then Avita, and then we need to move on.
I would love to see a feasibility concept of what it would take to get the lift station to get that Freeman Drive, Fowler Drive area up to the Danielsville Road trunk. I'd much rather see that, and it might be worth it, especially if you have the area to install some like renewable energy field or something. You can also get the trailer park. Yeah, I'd rather see something involving that on an existing trunk line that is on a roadway that would constitute much less environmental damage. And there might be ongoing costs to run that pump, but that's a cost that, could be borne by the folks who are directly benefiting by it or from like some other alternative fund. Rather than that massive environmental destruction that also endangers the health of the creek and also would require a boatload of eminent domain and money.
I do agree with Commissioner Link about a feasibility study for the Danielsville. We don't have to if we don't have to go in the other direction.
Sure.
I think that would probably be the best option. And then we could deal with the those 400, I forgot how many numbers of,
Sure.
later on as a separate issue. But to be able to do a feasibility study to go to the Danielsville outlet would be. I am going to say this. I do think that these are the things that ARPA money should have addressed. I think these are the things that we don't discuss until after the horse is out the fence. Because we could have used ARPA money to help those folks who are on septic tanks to get, whatever help they needed. So I needed to say that. But Kelly, my question to you is, don't we have some lines somewhere that people cannot plug into before I got on the commission?
So it's very common. I think, you guys alluded to it, that, you put a main line in and some new development is going to plug into that. Maybe slowly over a period of years or even decades of existing.
But do we have
development will plug into that. And the Trail Creek line is a good example, right? So there are a bunch of property owners along the Trail Creek line that effectively extends all the way up Highway 29 that are plugging into that line right now.
Do they know that they could do that? I mean, we put a line down for whatever the future is, but now we invested in lines that why would we? I guess I'm saying, do we need to look at that too? Because there are lines out there that could be used. That's what I'm asking.
I mean, I don't know if Hollis or his team can identify, like, in their engagement with the prospective customer base, if they're just people who are kind of ignorant of the fact that there might be a line relatively adjacent.
The Trail Creek corridor has seen a lot of growth since that line's gone in. We've actually seen numerous large developments tying onto that line and extending the main from that trunk line way out into the corridor to develop their like apartment complexes, commercial complexes, et cetera. It's pretty well known there's a line out there, and we see a lot of interest in connecting to it.
So again, I imagine because of the growth, mostly retail and businesses and stuff. But is there a way, is that another option to connect? If we're looking for these connection spots, is that an option?
Take the Sandy Creek Basin and Trail Creek, though, you're gonna have to redo your land use map because you're taking capacity away from Trail Creek to serve Sandy Creek Basin with that.
Okay, and that's what I'm asking about the Trail Creek, and I'm just looking for all the options, so that's not a good option.
My opinion, no.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay.
And I do think to kind of build off of what Matt said as well, and I want to see if I can kind of maybe capture what it is it sounds like y'all are saying for us to be able to take away. It's far, far more likely, just so everybody knows, that if we place a trunk line into a watershed, into a basin, far more likely that you're going to see folks come in with new development and have new pressure wanting to connect to that line than it is folks that are on septic systems connected to that line. The septic systems work, whatever that means, meaning no one's forcing them to connect into the sewer. There's a cost with doing so. Even if we're close, there's a cost with doing so. A cost that frankly, it's very difficult for them to bear compared to someone who has a raw piece of land who can turn development into the way in which to pay for that extension. It's just, that's important to kind of know. And you're sort of seeing that out, as was just mentioned with the Trail Creek one. We've got, talked the other day about a mobile home park that can actually connect to a system right now that's chosen not to do so. The line's there, they've chosen not to. And in the meantime,
but we know why, right?
Right. In the meantime, we've got a lot of this commercial development that actually has come out of the ground because there's sewer there. I think, and this might check to see if we've got the direction that we can kind of take away from. So sounds like we definitely have said there's zero interest in studying any further, any feasibility above what we're kind of calling this lower piece. So no need to look at any of those other parts of the basin. And the way I would describe this is really kind of to expand the feasibility assessment that has been done so far to do a couple of things. One of those is a fuller developed magnitude of costs that go beyond just the trunk line. So you're getting closer to where the septic systems in these duplex areas are located. So there's a better sense of what would it really cost to get up close to those structures. That's part one. Part two is what would also be feasibility and potential costs of looking at the development the area that's identified in future land use plan for development up in the Freeman Road area to, in effect, lift over to the other. I know there's some other complications that were just mentioned that have to be taken into account, but that's kind of the second part of the feasibility. And then this isn't the third part, just so we know, there's two in the future land use map. There are two growth areas, if you will. The one I just talked about with Freeman, the other one is down where the amphitheater site is. So both of those would be looked at. Is it feasible to get service to both of those areas? One possibly lifting over at the Danielsville, and the other is what's the magnitude of cost to get up close, if you will, to the duplexes? And then, that would kind of be the next piece of feasibility, because the next piece after that is design. And I'm not hearing we're ready to move into the design. We first need to expand the feasibility analysis, come back again and see if based on that, there is any desire or interest in moving any part of that toward design. Is that fairly?
So, and we're
accurate?
staying away from I just want to be clear, we're staying away from the Sandy Creek Basin. We're looking at the dams.
No, this would still, you actually can't serve the duplexes without going in the Sandy Creek Basin.
The ones on Trail Creek, do they connect to the Sandy Creek Basin at all?
No.
But I think the kind of what we heard from most be noted at this point is kind of stay out of the wet areas to the greatest degree possible, create the plan of greatest environmental benefit.
Yeah, and there's some reasons there's practical reasons, as was mentioned, for constructability. There's also some other regulatory reasons. There's some land in there that we actually can't do things with because there's some restrictions attached to the natural features that are present in the land. So yes, and some of that's going to obviously drive some of the costs up in terms of that feasibility, but we've got to give you at least a sense of what those costs are so you can tell us whether from a cost standpoint, an environmental standpoint, a benefit standpoint, is that something you want us to move toward the design stage? But it sounds like we've got a kind of part two of feasibility before we get to that.
Thank you, Ryan. All right.
Yeah.
I think it's fair.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. Alan, Brian, thanks a bunch for working on this. We appreciate it. Look forward to the next chapter. All right. We're here now to talk about purchasing because as a large organization that spends about $4 million a month, I stuff.
Can you take a quick break, Kelly?
All right, we'll take a 5-minute break real quick.
Hey, y'all, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Give me a thumbs up, Jeff, when we're ready. All right, we're here for continuity with our work session here on the 11th of May. 12th of May. And we have with us David Boyd, our finance director, who's going to bring to us some proposed updates to our purchasing ordinance. As I was just reviewing with David, we've come to understand this phenomenon called inflation. A dollar today in 2026 doesn't buy what a dollar bought in 1992. So we may want to think about adjusting some internal policies to accommodate that reality.
Thank you. As we stated on the very first slide or second slide here, most of the purchasing ordinance sections date from 92, 2004. We do have some that are newer than that were put in the last 7-8 years for various reasons. But most of them are from 92 to 2004. And of course, we all know that in this long time period since 92 and 2004, we've had inflation that's eroded existing threshold levels. We've had a lot of improvements in technology and internal control. Now all of our purchases flow through the Munis financial system and require documentation and supervision approval prior to payment, and that all gets signed off on by purchasing beforehand. And business practices have evolved as the U.S. and world economies have changed. So really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to update the purchasing thresholds to reflect the impact of inflation. You will see that a lot of the thresholds we've recommended are actually less than what the inflation adjusted thresholds are, but I didn't want to get out over my skis, so I kept them a little under. We also want to introduce an annual budget adoption of inflation adjustment to these thresholds so that we don't have to visit this issue again. We also want to adopt purchasing definitions that reflect current business practices and just in general change other functions that reflect improvement of internal control over small purchases through the adoption of our workflow technology in our Munis system. And so overall, these proposed changes should improve the efficiency of purchasing processes. And I'll tell you, the purchasing process is one of the most commonly hated processes in this government, and has been since the day I've been here. I went through I just put this in here for everybody. We had limited space in these tables, so I just put these abbreviations in there so that you would know. Also, the page numbers that are shown in the presentation, they refer to the red line purchasing ordinance included separately from the presentation, just so you would know where we're pulling that information from. Now, ordinance changes prior to 2012. One of the reasons I had to use two periods in which to calculate the threshold, the inflation impact on the threshold, just because, if you go to Municode and you go to the quick link, or you go to the upper right-hand corner where it's titled More, the drop-down menu offers a previous version's link, but that only goes back to really March 23rd, 2012. So I knew that no one could take time to go through the attic of the city hall and find these particular ordinance years. And so I just went ahead and calculated the threshold. So I'm just trying to give you a preview of why this is set up the way it is. So first of all, thresholds. So we have these main categories of thresholds for purchasing. Award of contracts. Currently the mayor and commission approved any threshold, any contract that's above or equal to 200,000. The manager, any contract below 200,000, and the purchasing administrator, which is the designee, is below 100,000. We're recommending, for mayor and commission to go up to 300,000, But if you look at the two threshold level, the two inflation adjusted threshold levels, we're below both those levels. And if we found out that the 200,000 was from 92, we'd be at nearly 500,000 now. Also, change orders within the budget. Right now, when someone comes to us and they need to get a change order approved, purchasing ordinance does not speak to what threshold a person need, or who they need to take the change order to. And so the purchasing policy does, but the ordinance does not. So we're recommending, mayor commission approve anything 100,000 or more, manager under, and purchasing administrator below 50,000. And we don't have, since it's not in the ordinance now, we don't have anything to compare that to. Currently in the policy, it will say $50,000. But I mean, you're gonna have $50,000 in change orders, in any major construction contract. So it does slow the process down. There's also this other thing in our purchasing ordinance about monthly contract reports, and that's where purchasing division creates a report that shows all contracts issued during the month of $10,000 or more. I personally don't know why that's in there, because that has probably been there since 92. I don't know. But I mean, if they're within these threshold limits and they're within the adopted budget, I'm really not sure why we produced that to begin with. But if you want to continue doing that, we could raise the threshold to 50,000. Now, I went back under footnote 3, which is hard to see on this slide here. But I looked at 3 months, November 25 through January 26, and you would still be getting about 50% of that report on average if we went from 10,000 to 50,000 in that reporting. Competitive solicitations and quotes. This is really one of the biggest areas that frustrates people. Right now, if you want to go out and buy something, you don't have to get any quotes if it's below $1,000. That's got to be from 92. And we just set that at $10,000 as a recommended level because that is the federal, it was the federal micro purchase level limit. It's now 15,000. 10,000. 3 quotes. Currently, if it's anywhere between 1,000 and 50,000, you have to get 3 quotes. We're just recommending 75,000 or less. And if you look at the inflation adjusted, it's well below both those thresholds. Anything that's a bid, in other words, you're going to go out for an RFP or a competitive solicitation. Right now it's 50,000. We're asking for greater than 75. And of course, that's below both the inflation adjusted thresholds. And also you have to understand that all RFPs are competitive solicitations of any kind. Doesn't matter if it's $10,000. State law requires us to put that on the Georgia Procurement Registry, so it's competitively bid anyway. So we're just basically adjusting all the thresholds here for inflation. And then one other thing that doesn't exist in the ordinance at all is when the manager is absent, who signs for his threshold limits? It's not in the ordinance or policy, to my knowledge. And so what we'd like to do is officially put, that during the manager's absence, there's someone that can act as his designee to sign contracts and approve other purchasing thresholds in his absence. So we've got the deputy or assistant manager or chief of staff, whoever he designates. So since this is one of the most important areas of purchasing is who's approving what, are there any questions at this level?
So sometime when the mayor's out, and then it be a designate, would this fall in that category?
The only kind of substitute for the mayors is when the mayor has a
Right,
contract.
right, I'm saying, so with that,
And so that would just continue.
okay. Regardless of, pretty much once it gets on your desk, everything is already gone.
That's right.
Right.
It already has appropriate either administrative or legislative approval.
Okay.
I think this sounds great. It seems to me like it's helping the process move forward. It sounds like there's a lot of busy work that monthly. Without, and all that was also probably before software. So, so it's, you're modernizing it in many ways as well as it's happening consistently. And I like your methodology on it as well as showing those thresholds, even though we're going up, we're not going way, way up. And the footnotes I can read, those are good too.
Okay. Any other questions? I know this is exciting. But it's something that we got to do.
David, I hope you bring us something similarly riveting the next time.
Yes, I always do. We'll talk about accounting standards next time.
Gatsby number.
One of the things we want to do is put into the ordinance paragraph that says, upon the adoption of the ordinance, all purchasing thresholds identified in this section shall be subject to annual increases by the rate of inflation as, defined by the U.S. government. And inflation adjusted thresholds will be rounded to the nearest $1,000 increment and will be adopted as part of the budget ordinance. So what that means, if you've got a threshold that's $100,000, let's just say the rate of inflation was 1%, we change it to 101. If it's 50,000, we might suggest we change it to 51, or we might just wait another year, but it would be cumulative from the time you adopt 50,000. So we would always go back and pose that. And it would work the same way as the fee schedules do now in the budget. So if you go in the budget and you look in the back section, you'll see a list of all the fees that we charge. We envision this being in the same, not in the fee schedule, but a separate threshold. Expansion of definitions. I just threw this in there because we've only got 5 definitions now in the ordinance, and I'm just telling you, we're putting in 17 so that we have more clarity for future purchasing decisions. And purchase order exemptions. I'm gonna let you cover this one.
I'm Jessica Berry, the purchasing administrator. So for purchase order exemptions, this is basically where there is not an actual procurement methodology that we're using. For example, if we are in litigation, we've obviously already obligated ourselves to pay a third party law firm to help us handle the litigation. And so basically, we just need a process to where we can cut a check to pay an invoice to said law firm. And so that would basically be the process that we would like to up with to put into the policy so that therefore we can expedite that process to help ease some of the burden on the departments that handle these types of purchases, so to speak. It's not anything that we actually play a part in helping determine who we're going to contract with, so to speak. As you can see, help services for when we are bringing employees on board through HR. Obviously, HR has a certain vendor, certain contractor that they want to do the onboarding exams with. Unfortunately, if we have a body transport with the coroner's office, we have certain people who are trustworthy that need to transport that body to an investigative lab to do autopsies. That is what this is talking about. So we would just like to see this process.
And when we do transport bodies, are we using funeral homes or What's the transportation bus or stuff like that?
No, sir. So if they are going to a crime lab for investigative purposes, that we are using, certified officers to do that.
We'll just say that when they originally brought this to me, they just said body transport. I'm like, I mean, who are we transporting? Yeah. And obviously, there's some things like utilities, we don't do a PO to pay Georgia Power bill. We gotta pay them no matter what. And usually settlements or awarded damage are through the mayor and commission. Real estate transactions are through mayor and commission. There's just no point in having a PO requirement for those. And currently, and in a lot of these things, we don't use POs because we can't. You've already made the decision. But the current ordinance just doesn't have a PO exemption. So we might as well formalize.
David, let me ask you, what about our constitution officers though, like sheriff, those things? Like, do they follow our same guidelines though?
Right. Competitive solicitation, exemptions, we're not really changing anything here. But right now, we have various types of competitive solicitation exemptions, like federal or state contracts and so forth, emergency purchases, sole source, those kinds of purchases, but they're spread out all through the ordinance. All we're doing is moving them all into one place so that if someone's reading the ordinance and wants to know if something is exempt from a competitive solicitation, it's all in one section and they don't have to look through the entire ordinance to find it. That's it. That was sweet. It's a lot better than sanitation, wasn't it? Any questions?
Mayor, this is something we're gonna need to vote on.
Yeah, so we would need to know, vote on this change in policy.
I'll have to do an agenda.
August, I think is when.
Well, it's a 45-day process, but then y'all don't vote in July.
Right, 'cause we're not here.
Yes.
Time to ponder it.
Yes.
I know.
So once I do the agenda, ponder it.
Thank you.
Things are rough to write.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it, y'all.
Thank y'all.
All right. How lucky we are, my friends. We get to begin our conversation about the FY 27 budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Get him out of bed, good morning.
Mr. Davenport, good to see
Yeah,
you.
just that show up.
No. Perfect time.
Every time.
There's snacks. I know you haven't had time to eat.
Ooh, I must
Commission lead.
gain some more weight.
Cooler soft drinks. Yeah, there's finance too.
Oh, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, check on. Yeah.
Bad.
What is that? Look at all the color.
This is a version of that.
Oh, sleepy thing.
I wanted to catch them because they.
Then I had.
So are we done recording? She's not going to schedule. No.
Talked with the.
I was. Are my feet up on the desk? Oh, yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I've been.
But then I need to ever.
You want me to pass?
This was fun.
Anyway,
But yeah.
so while it's fresh in my mind, I'll get with her to see if I can get her.
And those.
Okay.
We are continuing.
That's just all version of the narrative.
That was Thornton in the break.
That's a really good way to
Oh, that,
remind everyone.
Oh, look at this pamphlet.
Yeah,
It's all the colors.
see, it's not in the fancy paper.
Listen, that's right out of your palette.
I have this right here.
It's different.
Oh, it's
That's right out
I mean, it's got a few more,
Okay.
like.
Chalk is that color, does you have some chalk is that color?
Okay.
Because you don't have
Oh, I
enough
got
paper.
tacos. Here we go.
You don't have enough paper.
We do from there.
Well, yeah, the first, and then you, commission.
Thank you.
I want to. I understand if it really went to print, it was not.
But like, pop it out, like, get it back to them.
They will. That's my job.
I think, this.
No, but I have to share.
Oh, try it.
Sarah, did you do this?
It's there.
I heard, I was.
Usually means you're being caught off.
But it's just like-
You okay? then?
Yeah, because that was there, he was trying to change first.
It's really. I mean, we go this time now.
Yeah.
Jim, Bob, y'all about ready?
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, everybody. I think we're about ready to get started. Excited to be here and kick off for another budget year. Obviously, lots and lots of work. We've spent that leading the background. Department directors prepared their preferred budgets really prior to the beginning of the year. Those were aggregated and the manager kind of looked at what was possible and had some recommendations. And then working in conjunction, the manager and I, produced in front of you. And everybody has in front of you just a kind of a one-page bullet point set of highlights. These are largely reflected in the letter that's in front of your budget book that everybody has a copy of, but I do kind of go down but this is what I guess I would call the just the facts ma'am part of it. And then ask the manager for any additional input after that. And then as Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioner Fisher will just sort of field any questions. I think ideally today, we're just sort of collecting thoughts. We're obviously going to have a series of other meetings that you have kind of in the block at the bottom of your one pager days from now. So plenty of time for your thoughts to coalesce into maybe some direction if you have some different direction. So just kind of to note these elements that I think everybody's interested in. The millage rate would remain at 12.25 mils. And I'm going to come back to that because one of the things that I will be proposing is that we put a flossed, flexible local option sales tax on the ballot for November 2026 that would effectively lower that to about 7.25 mils, with the trade-off being a new penny of sales tax. The FY27 budget totals about $377 million, with the general fund being about $212 billion of that. Total capital investment is about $67 million of general fund, about $67 million of which about $7 million is general fund capital. This budget recommends 3.5% market rate adjustment in employee compensation. What I would like to contemplate, though, given the prospect of extra dollars that will roll in, is that if we do get more than $200,000 of extra dollars in the digest, we bump that to 4%, which was the manager's sort of idealized version. This budget removes 9 existing positions from the general fund that total about $484,000. There are a couple of new general fund positions. A new assistant manager, and of course, we talked about that a year ago, really wanting to have a better distributed workload across the organization so that no individual in the manager's office is having to bear too heavy a burden. It would move from part-time to full-time, a correctional institute social worker, just to better do kind of remediation work with them. There'd be a probate fiduciary compliance position in probate court. Probate court has to manage both people's living wills and their estates, post departure.
And fortunately, we just have a huge volume of work there. And so probate has for some years been concerned that we're really not doing a careful enough job kind of following up on the directive of people's wills. There would be a part-time to full-time probation lab tech, just to handle internally the volume of work there. And then there would be a facility maintenance tech in the courthouse. Of new positions from other funds other than the general fund. There would be a county engineer that would be split funded between our SPLOST and T-SPLOST programs and the building inspections fund. And this person would really be doing two things, would be kind of helming this sort of newly brought in-house effort to kind of helm our own capital projects rather than outsource the bulk of that. And then secondarily, or maybe with kind of about half that time, really do kind of a much more, I guess what I'm going to call, take the bull by the horns approach to our planning and development processes, just so that it's easier for anybody to go through our development process, whether you're kind of opening a barber shop or whether you're opening a 100,000 square foot facility. Somewhat connected to that, there'd be two project managers in the capital projects department, stormwater operations coordinator, transportation public works staffer, and then one additional airport firefighter. This budget also asks for funding for an economic development strategic plan. We've laid out in our economic development planning cornerstones, biotech, healthcare, small business, creative culture, for example, but we'd like to dig a layer deeper and really make sure we're doing all the things necessary to launch all of those aspects of our economic development plan.
And Mayor, the next item is actually labeled wrong. It says general fund. It's actually the T-SPLOST excess revenue, 12.6 million.
Yeah, and then next bullet point, we are going to realize more dollars from the current T-SPLOST package, not the one that's in front of voters in May, but the existing 2023 package than we would have anticipated. And so there's a recommended set of expenditures around that that's part of this budget. For a half a year following the December 31st expiration of ARPA dollars, this would continue our ACC CCSD youth partnership to the tune of about $65,000. We would continue to fund those Athens Housing Authority embedded youth development programs to the tune of $150,000. This would add a salary supplement to the sheriff's office, which is very common around the state. And in fact, there's been compression within the sheriff's office. So the sheriff is now earning as the director of that department less than some subordinates. And so this would raise it up. And I used the Augusta Richmond and the Columbus Muskogee models to sort of model this cost.
So we're allowed to use the T-SPLOST funds for these?
No, this is general fund dollars. No, we've moved off of T-SPLOST.
Wait, back to that, what was the amount, Bob, that you said?
T-SPLOST, it was 12.6 million.
Yeah.
And that's for the whole,
Yeah, and I'll give you all, I've got a kind of a one page that has the,
breaks that down?
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so that bullet point that says general fund capital 12.6 should say T-SPLOST excess.
Okay.
Yeah, that was just a misprint.
12.6 million.
That's correct.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
That's the T-SPLOST excess, not general fund capital. There are some increases in cost at the jail, particularly given the population load there. So there's recommended medical increase of $350K and recommended meal increase of $280K. This would reduce the neighborhood leaders program funding by about $380,000. This would extend the season at the Bishop Park pool to the tune of $40,000. It's anticipated that this would probably be part of a multi-year plan. Leisure services staff would sort of just get some familiarity with what the community need is kind of in this coming fiscal year. So kind of late summer of calendar year 2026. And the expectation is that probably next year, a year from now, they would refine that and say, hey, we've really found out, we really need the weekend hours. We don't need daytime hours. So we're feeling our way through, but sort of recognizing that there's a desire for an extended season. And so this basically would take us from keeping that pool open from when students go back to school at the beginning of August through Labor Day. Because currently that's when we've been shutting down pools, is when kids get back to school.
Awesome.
Yeah. Let's see, moving on, this fully funds the library's request for the tune of $461,000. fully funds the public defender's request to the tune of $167,000. It increases community events programming with $50,000 new dollars to bring that total funding up to $300,000. You'll recall that 5 years ago, we were at $60,000. So over the course of that many years, we've quintupled, sextupled, excuse me, the amount of money going in there. And this, of course, distributes the people and belonging function throughout the organization, which does result in a reduction of FTE from 6 to 4 individuals. And then there's a set of lifts in the rate fees and service charges that are at the very back of the book. So you can kind of see those current FY 26 and proposed FY 27 charges, basically to just kind of right size them through almost the same inflationary vehicle that David Boyd was talking about when it comes to the purchasing project. Staff has done a great job assembling some highlights. So we've got a new piece. Thank you, Jeff, and your team. New piece of our public information out there. And Bob, is there anything else you want to highlight?
Yeah, I just
for questions and.
Yeah, I'll just highlight a couple of things. Some of these are just reinforcing things that I had said when I presented kind of the priority meeting. One of those is this is the beginning of the movement, as the mayor said, to bringing more of our capital project management in-house. And as I shared with you all, that will probably be a 2-year undertaking. So this year it's the county engineer, 2 project managers. I would expect next year is probably at least 2 more project managers. And then you should see most likely with the T-SPLOS that's in front of the voters in May, you would likely see those projects being the first projects that our internal project management would be anticipating kind of taking on. So multi-year phasing, but we're starting that process as we have moved forward with those. Largely, what I shared with you all has simply been picked up by the mayor. The mayor was able to identify some additional funding with really going from that 4% to 3.5% that addressed, if you remember, I said, if there is extra money, there's some judicial items that need attention. Those items have now been covered and are in the mayor's proposed budget. And then as I shared with you all in the most recent update, the tax digest appears or is coming in stronger than what we had certainly projected within the budget, somewhere around $1.6 million of additional revenue. At that meeting, I think the mayor has said it also in his meetings and in his discussions, and I'll reinforce it again, that our recommendation for what it's worth would be that those dollars be used first to restore the 3.5% to 4%. That's around $217,000. We also were required to do about a $250,000 contribution because of change in state law dealing with state police pension. So it would be to restore that back into the budget. And then we would recommend that the remainder of it go back into fund balance so that we can lower our use of the fund balance. The reason that recommendation is there is because, as you'll hear on Thursday, as we move into actually building new judicial center and the associated debt issuance with that, the stronger, in my opinion, the stronger our fund balance is, the better that will be viewed by our credit rating agencies, which will ultimately benefit us in getting us closer to that 20% number above our 16.9% minimum standard, I think helps us in that regard. So that's kind of why we're making that. That is probably by far the most substantial change from the time that both I presented and also the mayor's budget was submitted, which is more revenue coming in than had anticipated through the tax digest. So I think those are the things that I kind of wanted to highlight with that as well. So thank you.
Okay,
Question.
thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Before we get started though, Sarah did a great job last year capturing things that we talked about in these meetings. So I asked her, we talked about, I want her to do the same thing. But I'll say something, but all of us need to be present in discussion. One thing I need to bring to the mayor, we're not gonna have a whole bunch of CDOs coming down the pipe this year with our budget. I want us to get out whatever requests that you may get in, let's get them in. Let's try to agree upon, but we're not doing all these CDOs. One budget, recommend that the village stay 12.5 where we are. And again, we look at the tax digest any type of, funding that we may use. But again, if you got any recommendation, I know some of y'all have already emailed some of those things, and some of them will be difficult to do, but at the same time, let's just have that discussion. Make sure whenever Sarah shares with us, we have that information, and we're gonna try to get this thing together, but not a whole lot of CDOs this year. Get this thing over the hump, and we can move forward. So with that said, questions, comment, and again, this Thursday, we got all the constitutional officers coming in. So again, I think, again, I'll send a text and email out tomorrow, or either tonight and tomorrow. We need to be present, you know, because I don't want people coming at the last minute. I agree with the mayor. We're not gonna be waiting for the last minute to get this stuff done. Let's get it done, show up, you know, for these meetings. We can probably get some feedback from our public. But we'll get emails from our public, but I think what he has presented, there's some good stuff on here. So let's just try to get some things done and move forward.
Yeah, Commissioner Fisher, I just want, also again, on Thursday, in addition to the constitutional elective, we'll be talking about the concept plan and the funding plan for the judicial center. So it really will be important as well.
It's gonna be a long meeting, guys.
Yeah, and Andrew reminded me, so I won't forget this, one of the other things that has kind of changed is, and we were hoping it would go back in the other direction, but as you can imagine, fuel costs are increasing substantially. And so that may be a cost. We also need to look ahead into the upcoming budget year that we hadn't necessarily accounted for the rates that we're currently seeing. So I throw that one out there too.
And one other thing, you know, we don't have, I know sometimes we have these pet projects. I'm not sure we're gonna have a whole lot of those this year neither. So again, let's take a look at what we got and then go from there. But I really want this to be a smooth transition. So, Patrick.
Yeah, I got several questions. So constitutional officers, are they gonna be asking for more money too? Or is it gonna be, is everything covered in?
No, I would say probably with the exception of a couple of them, much like all of our departments, every one of them had requests that exceeded what could be funded. Now, how many of those ultimately get talked about when they meet with you? I don't know. But there's certainly, I would certainly let you know, absolutely in every instance, again, as with every department, there were requests that exceeded the available funds.
Okay.
And Pat, we met with them already. I just gave them what they were, sometimes, but yeah, they may, but I we just have to play it by ear.
I think it's fair to say like the top priorities were covered. You know, it may be the one of greatest disparities, the sheriff's office.
Yeah.
Okay. Mayor, can you go over your referendum for November?
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you asking about that. So, of course, in 2025 and then kind of as amended in 2026 in the Georgia General Assembly session, local governments were given a new option for an additional penny of sales tax called FLOST, or floating local option sales tax. And what that does is as you create a new penny of sales tax cash register, that then reduces the millage rate for all users, for individual homeowners, for folks who've got a beauty salon, for somebody who might have a car repair shop, and then everybody. And the approximate trade-off would be one new penny of sales tax for about a 5 mil reduction. The thing that is important to keep in mind, though, is that that doesn't necessarily remain exactly the same every year, because what you do is first you collect a calendar year of that sales tax penny. And one year it may be exactly 5 mils, the next year it may be 4.95 mils. The year after that, it might be 5.01 mils. So it's going to float a little bit just as the value of that penny modifies. Now, the thing that we do know about revenue in Athens-Clarke County is that a lot of that revenue, sales tax front, comes from outside the county. So those football game weekends, those entertainment events downtown, and certainly the 10,000 people who live on campus who are getting everything from to cell phones to laptops dropped on their doorsteps are generating dollars that could flow into this community via all those activities. You know, if I was to kind of play the con side of the argument, I mean, certainly there's a little more variability in sales tax, but like I described a moment ago, you're gonna have no net change in revenue because every year, if the sales tax goes up, well, your property tax is gonna go down a little bit more. If the sales tax doesn't go up quite as much, your property tax may encumber a little bit more of the overall budget. But it basically, from a revenue perspective, it's net neutral from year to year. Certainly, there's the reality that sales tax is a regressive tax. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I would say in aggregate, you're not only helping that wealthy property owner, but you're helping that property owner whose house may only be worth $140,000 equally. So you're really helping everybody, and you're drawing new dollars into the community that wouldn't be flowing into the community again because of those folks who reside on campus and because of those tourists. That would require a vote by the commission in June in order to put it on the agenda. An intergovernmental agreement with Winterville, and Winterville said they're favorable to this. And then there would be a vote in the summer by the Board of Elections to place it on the ballot in November. So structurally, those would be the steps.
How about the next steps after?
And Bogart as well. Thank you, Jay.
How about the next steps at the timeline after that? So it's voted on, let's say it's approved.
Yeah. So what would happen? You'd begin collecting that new penny in 2027. And then on people's next following tax bills, they would see that reduction in millage based on the first year of collection.
So practically what happens is the sales tax starts January and the dollars are placed in an account because they can't be used for any other purpose. The account grows, earns interest. From that, you then calculate what the millage reduction is that's reflected in the new tax bill. And effectively, some version of that happens each year for the 5 years. It's a 5-year. If approved, it would be a 5-year.
That's right. Yeah. So the first approval, if the voters would go for this in November, would be for 5 years. And then you would get local legislation to extend it for another 5 from the local delegation of the General Assembly.
So though, if it's collected in 2027, okay, does that not, you can't, it doesn't affect the millage rate until the following year in 2028 when we're working on the fiscal year?
We were just looking at that.
It would be reflected in.
The fiscal year 29?
Reflected in your fall 28 tax bills.
Even though you hadn't collected the fall 2028 tax bills. Okay, so it's a year.
Yeah, because you collect a year's worth of that sales tax.
So that wouldn't, in terms of us and the millage rate reduction, we wouldn't anticipate that till the fiscal year 29 budget.
28.
No, 20.
Yeah, I think for the budget purposes, it would show that as the millage. Now, again, it shouldn't affect the revenue side of it, but in terms of, posting what the millage rate is, the millage rate would actually change with the fall tax bills. But as far as a budget, yeah, we'd have to think about how we would account for that in the FY 20.
Right.
Yeah. Because it kind of changes in the middle, I guess, of the fiscal year. In terms
Right. So whether,
Generally, it lags.
right. So I mean, because like next year will be, these years keep flying by, don't they?
Now you'll be doing the fiscal 28 budget.
Right. But we won't only have collected half of a year, so we won't have it yet.
So I think because you've got a full year of collections in the basically December 31st, 2027, I think that kitty, that fund, then goes to fund the following fiscal year's reduction.
So I guess my question on that, just to clarify it, when your list of questions, when would the homeowner get the reduction?
It would be with their fall 28 tax bill. So that's when they would realize the reduction.
And this is the reason it's called floating,
Yeah,
because it's floating up and down and.
depending on the collection.
Because it really depends, yes, on the collection.
Yeah.
So just for, one thing the mayor and I talked about and Bob, we want to make sure we do a good job educating the public.
Yep.
To really understand what this means and the impact. So I think it's critical that we do that as a collective body and make sure that.
And I think that
Understand, and we can probably do that during these, meetings.
in addition to the timing, I'd say the key issues that are important to communicate would be that the sales tax that is collected can only be for property tax relief. It can go for no other
Right.
purpose. And that property tax relief is directly related to the amount that you earn. That's the floating part as it goes up and down, 5%, 4%, whatever it might be, depending on those revenues. I think those are questions folks are gonna want to know in terms of what you do with the sales tax. That's the only thing you can do with it.
But what I think pertinent to your question, what we'll return with is just a calendar.
Right,
You know,
right.
Here's when it needs to be voted to go on the budget. Here's when the public would vote. Here's when the first year of collections would happen. Here's when you would see your first tax bill with the reduced millage rate. And then here's when it would sunset and have to be renewed by the local delegation of the General Assembly.
I'll come back to you. Let's go ahead.
Couple of questions. On the Economic Development Strategic Plan, when was the last one done?
There's never been one. So
My next question, so we feel obligated, since ARPA funds have ended, that we should still do 55,000 for the school district. What does that entail?
So we have an intergovernmental agreement with the school district. And, I'll back up, I'll back up a few decades. So, people who were very involved in youth development in the 70s and 80s, have often noted to me, listen, there was a point post-unification when the amount of youth services were just generally reduced in the county. And and then kind of even some newer folks who've moved to the community, will look to a place like Barrow County or Walton County and say, look, over there, the county is doing all this stuff. They're running these youth programs for soccer or softball or volleyball or other things. And so this program, was a really nice opportunity to say, hey, we're going to take kind of collective responsibility for all these youth needs. And now, of course, we've got 1,600 kids who in the most recent year were from 4th to 8th grade kind of out there, getting really positive role models who were there with them on the court or the field or in the art studio every day. We're consuming their time effectively. And really because it's this partnership model, we're really spending a lot less money than either if it was a school district activity or it was a county activity.
I'm gonna have a question for that when we get back to you. I see the housing up, same story with the ARPA money. It just feels like it's a relationship, even though we don't have that pot of money no more, that you want to continue. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and really, this is kind of always the academic in me, is that what we know is that we invest in kids kind of during those critical years of their life. They're putting themselves on better paths to lifelong success. It means that those are kids who are going to have mentors who are going to help them as they get a job and get into college and get into a successful life. And of course, the Housing Authority kids are some of our most challenged kids. And so not only are we giving them better lives, but we're also preventing some problems that we know, unfortunately, kids who don't have good role models and good opportunities to move into, have befall them. So I see this as both a sort of lift to our young people and prevention of bad stuff happening, because I've heard your people be out on Camp Highway 78.
So did both of these make a request, or you kind of?
I was proactive.
Because I guess my thought is that the money that we gave somebody, I don't know, those recreation centers are closed.
Just for the summer.
Is it just for?
Just for
Yeah, because they're busing students to the central location.
The camp for the summer. Just for the summer.
Okay.
It'll be open back up in the fall.
Okay, well, I'm still gonna look at that one.
Okay.
And my last one, I have a question about is the neighborhood leaders, and it's a reduction. And from what I understand, staff has asked all the neighborhood leaders to reapply for their positions. And I think they're only, I think there's 16 now, is that it?
And there would be 10 and a supervisor.
Well, I heard 8. And maybe the 10, maybe that counts for terrorist net, maybe that's.
Yeah, I think that.
And then there are 2 that are SNAP funded.
Okay, so here's my concern. There is, now this is what I was told, if I'm wrong, correct me. That even though they did ask the neighborhood leaders to reapply, they're also gonna be opening up reapply internally, but they're also going to be opening up for external applications. Now, I'm a firm believer and support the neighborhood. I can't seem to get my head around, if you only have 8 positions and half apply, because 4 have quit or are quitting. They're not going through that process. And in the past, we have gotten all these great reports. Why would you open that up to new folk?
And you'd be best taught with Aaron and Terrace, but I'll give you kind of the short version of it. At least in part based on my last school district administrative job as well, which is that these are somewhat reformatted jobs, so the job description is somewhat different. Each of these jobs has both a generalist and a specialist component of the job functionality. So for example, you do some general things for the entire population, but then you have some specific knowledge in housing, for example.
Kelly, they did that. That was their model before. You had certain people who did just housing. You had certain people who did youth. So that is not, they may write it differently, but they were doing that before.
Well, it is in fact written differently.
Okay.
So my experience in public school context before is that when you have this sort of job reformatting, you have everybody reapply so that you're really kind of seeing the kind of full field of opportunity. Because ultimately, the tax dollars being spent, we want the best productivity out in the community from it.
Well, then we probably wasted our money then if we don't think these are the best and we got to go outside and open it up to everybody else. But I know I'm gonna do what Mayor Pro Tem said. I'll get back with you. But you already know ahead of time what my concern.
Yeah, and if I can just.
Patrick's not finished.
Oh, that's fine.
I'm sorry, Patrick. Patrick, finish and get Commissioner Link, then Commissioner Wright.
Thank you.
I have just a whole bunch of questions, so, it's not bad, it's just more clarification.
Knew you weren't done. I can just tell
Sorry.
from where.
That's right, county manager, explain the storm operation coordinator. Don't they have that already? Who is?
So I can explain.
As I can.
Yeah, so in our streets and drainage division, it's funded partially with stormwater and partially with general funds, depending on the type of work they have. The work of that division has grown significantly. So if you think about 10, 20 years ago, it was a little bit of road repaving, the occasional sidewalk project. And honestly, pipes were somewhat of an afterthought. And as we've grown in our presence, we've expanded our crews over time. And we also have taken on a much more aggressive stormwater management component. So you all are familiar with like the live stream pipe replacement program. This would be somebody who is a peer. There's only one operations coordinator in streets and drainage right now. This one would allow them to manage all of the stormwater crews that are focused on those water quality and drainage issues, and have the other ops coordinator available for your bread and butter public works, if you will. And then one last point is these are our frontline folks when we have storms, and we get a lot of mileage out of our division administrator and our operations coordinator in those storms. But if we think about having a prolonged event, having a little bit more leadership capacity allows us to have continuity of operations over 3, 4, 5 days, even into weeks. And so we feel like there's a resilience component as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'm almost done. The facility maintenance for the courthouse technician, we're gonna be building a new courthouse. Will that position be needed?
Yeah, actually, what we'll do is that position will it could do 2 things. Will do 2 things. It'll follow over to the new courthouse. And also it would potentially be able to be a part of what would serve the then renovated courthouse. You would hope with the new courthouse, there'll be less maintenance, but there's always gonna be maintenance responsibilities associated with it. And hopefully they'd be able to bridge both of those. Plus, keep in mind, we're probably 3 to 4 years from occupancy of that new courthouse, so we still have that window in there as well.
And nothing in nobody essential services Because that's generally central services job.
It would still be central services. Sorry, yeah, they'd just be assigned to the courthouse.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. And Bob, can you explain the FTE county engineer is a 2-year process capital?
Yeah, so the county engineer, one, I'm kind of, I have to say that I was quite surprised when I came here that we don't have a county engineer. I mean, that's just a standard position. And it goes back to something I shared with you all before, which is we just don't have very many engineers, period. County engineer would ultimately have one primary responsibility. Initially, they're going to have two. The one primary responsibility is to work alongside Josh, who is the capital project administrator. So think of him handling all the business side of the operation. And this engineer would be the one managing those project managers. That is the group that ultimately will take over project management from today, Jacobs. Again, it's going to take some time to actually kind of unwind those. So that is going to be their primary responsibility. Initially, I'm going to kind of divide their interest in that they'll start building that capacity that I just described. The other thing they'll be doing though initially is assisting myself in reviewing completely our development review process with the intent of reconstructing that process. So that's everything from what planning does to what utilities does to DPW does in terms of reviewing development standards. I would expect that's a 18-month kind of process, 18 months to 2 years. And hopefully that will enable that person to step out of that responsibility so they can dedicate completely on the other. I would also think at that time, you would see that position move out of the manager's office and into the capital department section. So, because then it would be focused exclusively on that capital side.
That's it, Mayor Pro Tem.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, the neighborhood leaders, have we had conversation with the school district about sharing the expense of that program?
So, Family Connection Communities in Schools runs 2 parallel programs. They run the Neighborhood Leaders Program, and then they run a set of school-based positions. Neighborhood leaders are intended to be community-facing. Of course, when they were first designed, they were designed just geographically around those elementary school feeder zones. That was really more just a function of breaking the map up in some kind of way that worked than it was really being school embedded. But they have some staff who are school embedded in the elementary and the middle school.
Okay.
If I can also add one thing with neighborhood leaders, and I should have done this with Commissioner Thornton, because it's something, not looking for any response to this at this point. It's just something I think as we get into further discussion of the budget is the way this is structured right now with the neighborhood leaders is this is the proposed reduction to neighborhood leaders, meaning you would not expect me certainly to propose in the next budget year further reduction of those. If that ultimately is not the direction, we'll need to know that as we go in, because I'm just working under the assumption that this is the proposed reduction within this program. They will then manage the program with that number of folks aligned with what your expectations are for that program. Ultimately, that's not the case. We'll need to know that as we start to shape the FY28. Again, don't need any response or answers to that now. It's just something I put in your mind as we go forward with it.
I mean, I'm reluctant to reduce the funding of the program. I think it makes sense for a reorganization of it. I could see how those geographical areas were kind of inequitable. But, I don't want to see the capacity of that program be impacted. So I'd be eager to hear from the program on how this directly affects the functioning of it. I have other concerns. The community events programming, I feel like those folks have made a solid case for significantly increased funding. And, look at these accomplishments and we cite the 336,000 guests who visited the arena. And also the Real-Time Crime Center. And, part of the expenses for those community events is, paying our public safety to operate the Real-Time Crime Center to assure those events are safe. And also the 360,000 people who visited the arena. I surmise that probably at least that many people have visited our special events. And mean, I personally know people who are, reducing their summer travel plans because of, the cost of gas and inflation and, the general economic uncertainty. And those community events provide free family entertainment. The opportunity for families to enjoy themselves and enjoy this community, and for families from outside this community to come in and enjoy them. I have friends who travel every year to come back to Athens and spend their money here for these events. And they're more and more expensive to put on. And we're paying our officers more, thankfully, rightfully so. When those events happen, the events that are paying officers.
Commissioner Wright, and then Commissioner Myers, Commissioner Wright.
Okay. So I wanted to understand back to the 12.6 million T-SPLOS over of the last one. And did I hear you say that you're going to use that for the operational T-SPLOS things that we can't do on the next?
No. So we had,
Okay.
when I did my presentation, we had a whole list
Yeah.
of what those could go for. So for example, it would go to more paving, it would go toward more of the traffic signals. So things that are already in T-SPLOS that we can apply more dollars.
That's going to be in,
Yes.
so the list of what that 12.6 is going to go to, I'll find in here.
Yes, and I also can send it out again to you all as well. That was in the presentation that I gave to the
Okay.
priorities.
Yeah.
But yes, that's what it would go. Now, I will say, in fairness, that's our recommendation. That's not fixed in stone. It has to be
Those,
projects that came out of the T-SPLOS. Those are the ones we're recommending that it be.
but that's also the T-SPLOS that House Bill 328 doesn't affect, or it does affect that backwards.
We're still evaluating what the
Okay.
impact of that is. So again, it was in the last update, there was a House bill that was passed, which looks like it will affect the ability of T-SPLOS to be used for operational purposes for transit if that transit is providing free fares. Now, we're trying to evaluate what that means and how that plays out into it. That would probably not affect that list of T-SPLOS projects. It could most definitely affect the T-SPLOS that's up for a vote. So that's part of what we're evaluating. I think Judd and his folks are working up some kind of sort of memo and some other information associated with
And
that.
if I might add, the proposed capital offsets of 12 million and change is a little less than half of our anticipated T-SPLOS 23 surplus collections. So there are still have to be conversations after this budget about what to do with those collections, assuming they materialize as the state indicates they will.
Okay.
And these will be project ready. They'll be ready to go if that's the case. The thing that we do, they're ready, these projects are ready.
I mean, we can spend the paving money about as quickly as you can.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to describe it is we're trying to identify things that can be done quick.
Right.
Paving's a good example, getting the traffic signal, because those are repairs of existing traffic signals upgrading, or another example. Sidewalks might be with it. Yeah, because those dollars are coming toward the end of the sort of the T-SPLOS world, if you will, and don't want to spend the next 6 years trying to figure out how to spend those dollars.
Okay. I'm good with what is come forward and the extra. So now that we know our revenue, the additional revenue is the 1.6 million you recommend, you said?
Right now, that's sort of the estimate.
And I agree with the philosophy of that going to the employees. What'd you say, get that up to 4%? And then the rest going back to the reserves. Bond rating, I agree with all that strategy. What I don't agree with is the community events program increasing again, because it already increased a lot. And just to be clear, the entities downtown have the option for beer festival zones, which Jam for Cam made over $1 million on. So if there's a beer zone activity, I'm picturing that the Athens Film Fest group does not have that. So I can see where additional funds might need to go, but they also don't need the extra security and the cost and the camera and the police for not having that zone. So the zones are there, they cost more, but they are a revenue generating if they would get into the current mode of raising money. And so some of our longtime events downtown, and again, these are only downtown, we have a whole community that deserves special events and gathering places. So I would vote if we do have this 50,000 extra, let it go to the mayor's CIP for disbursements. It's hotel motel as well. Kelly, is there anything conflicting in that? Because it's both hotel motel. One's
No, it's available. I mean, certainly legislatively, my understanding is that, it's available for countywide expenditure. I'll say the mayor's fund hasn't been increased in 20,
yeah.
4 years, without a doubt. So I'm not going to turn down any more money, and I don't think any
No, but I think,
would turn down.
but I think the ability to reach out to something newer that's starting up versus the longtime ones asking for more and more when actually we have with the festival, the beer zones have created a revenue ability for them. So I do have a conflict in that. But again, this is a minuscule part of the huge budget that I think we're all mainly in agreement on. But I also want to just share with people who weren't in the email that I am at a conference, so I'll miss all next week. So that's why I want y'all to know that I won't be going to anything.
Commissioner Myers, going, then I come back, you could, Mr. Lake.
Okay, on the community events programming, just to clarify, when you were talking about, you said the 50,000, you're like, let's not include Kelly's 50,000.
No, I'm saying put it to the mayor's CIP, and because that can
Okay,
be for the whole county versus the community events program.
Yeah, no, I just didn't understand if you were talking about it and not putting any more. On that community events program, I would really, really love it if I could see, I guess it's on E8 in the budget, like where that is. Because we hear this, year after year, and you have to have some sort of magic knowledge to understand where that community increase is.
Tourism improvements and special events.
If there's nothing that says it's
spell it out.
included in some of the line items, so I don't know what the events, like, I don't know which one it is. There was a 40,000, it's not clear. Look, it was on E8.
So you just wanted to expand that list so you can see what's actually.
Yeah, like, I mean.
What goes to what?
I mean, what goes to what? I mean, there is an increase with the mayors between, on tourism improvement and special activities, but that's only a 40,000. And that makes it to 385, which is 85,000 more than the 300,000 that's now going to community events. So what's the other 85 going to? And where's the other 10,000 that Kelly said he added in there? Like, I can't find that stuff
You
there.
really need kind of more of a line
If you
item.
look on page C86,
Here we go.
that's the section on, has other general administration, there it is.
Wait, slow down a little bit. Let me get there.
Back in the-
C86. It may have it broken down enough for you, if not.
And just so that you've got this, about to forward to everybody, the coming agenda for the Downtown Development Authority that has a recommended line item budget for each of those individual events.
Yeah, it would be helpful actually if this is, the community events program was split out, because obviously it's not all the special events, because you just said that was at 300,000. And then the other thing is that if this is coming from the hotel motel, and then that's over, I can look over here. I kind of like them to match so that I could see this stuff in both places, that it matches up. So that's one thing. And along with that, and this, maybe I will pull it up from another year, Sarah, the answer to this. I once again need the answer to the question, how much money are we obligated from the hotel motel to the arena, to the visitor center, and also bond obligation that we've had? So just so I can clearly respond to that question when people ask me that, that I should know that. And Speaking of this book, actually, I would like to know if anyone else, like, y'all can like highlight some of the differences between our previous year's budget book and this year's, but I'm looking at the splost balances at the back. And I think it would be, these numbers don't match up with what's on the monthly expenditure summary for 2026. I believe that might be because the project balance here adds in the designated encumbered. But I don't know, I'm just making that up. And I think that there needs to be a little asterisk there explaining the difference, because otherwise you're looking at these numbers, and you're like, they don't match. Like, and they're coming out from the same place.
Yeah, and hopefully so we actually just met on this yesterday. So my goal is, and it's partly accomplished in this book, and we're hoping we can get it more accomplished in the final version of this, because, you know, my goal is to make sure that someone in our community can pick up the budget and know what it is that we're anticipating spending on capital in FY 27, is this example, regardless of what the source of revenue is. So that would include airport, utilities, but also SPOS and T-SPOS. So the number that the mayor read, for example, said we're going to spend $67 million FY 27 in capital. Even that's not a full accounting of what we're going to spend on capital, because we got T-SPOS and SPOS dollars to spend also. So I think it'll take us a couple of budget cycles to get to exactly where we want, but I think that is the starting place. The starting place is to take that list you're looking at, saying, can we get an accurate number of what we expect to spend in 27 on T-SPOS and SPOS projects?
Well, I might suggest, I know this is another column, but if I were a community member picking this up now, and I'd look at that T-SPOS 2018 project balances, and I'd go, whoa, this is crazy. We're doing 2026, and there's like millions and millions of dollars from 2018 here. And it doesn't, you know, I might add another line after this or somewhere that says, you know, encumbered and designated, because I know some of these aren't even accurate, because if I go to the 2011, there's a couple of $1 million here, and there's a couple of things that aren't, like, it doesn't match up. So like I was looking at this and going, whoa, or like if you look at the classic, you know, there's a bunch of things in here. Anyway, I'm just saying that to me is an issue with the way this is laid out right now. Let me see what else I have here. Special events, I asked you about that. Oh, and I am totally, I would love it if we have one. I mean, you're talking about the mayor pro tem saying, you know, multiple CDOs, but really we've ended up having two, and there's been surprises at the end that have changed this. Hopefully, you know, under leadership and encouragement from all of us together, we could get this and compromise with one. It'd be great to have that as a.
That's my goal.
That's your goal. So, but that means that we all need to be aware of what's going on. Yes.
That's why it's so critical. And I want to do this more out in public.
Yes, in the public and have it here. And so we have to compromise about things, you know, compromise is part of it, right? But I'd love it to all be out in the public.
Well, I agree. Can we not do any emails and texts about stuff we want? Let's all make sure we're.
I'm fine.
We already got the
meeting.
Thank you for that. We already got some, so yeah, let's talk what we discuss in public.
Right.
Let me get Commissioner Thornton, link, and then that report, and then we're gonna close this out.
Well, I'll say it out public. If we're gonna be bringing in neighborhood leaders from the outside, I will not. The whole idea from the beginning was for the neighborhood leaders to gain skills while they're helping somebody else to gain the skills that would promote them. That was expressed more than one time. So, and we have seen neighborhood leaders move on and advance. I never thought neighborhood leaders, the same one, should be always there forever collecting retirement. So if they have not been good enough or have not develop those specialist skills, I will not be supporting, neighborhood leaders, so.
Let me make one suggestion. I think the mayor mentioned it. Reach out to area. Why wouldn't you?
They better watch it on TV.
I will.
Okay, and no.
I think it's important though that they hear that though.
Yeah.
I don't mean on TV. I may need to hear it from us.
Okay, well,
That's my
I
suggestion.
can do that. I can, I'm not being difficult.
Commissioner Lee.
Yeah, no.
My other thought is, I do not, we're supposed to be moving forward on the Housing Trust Fund. With a coordinator or director. So I assume since it's not in this recommended budget, but 2027, that position is going to be later.
It would be, so the housing fund, it's a good question. I mean, it's going to ultimately be, once you all decide how it's going to be managed and administered, you know, it will be a budget that you'll have to establish associated with kind of the contractual relationship with whomever it might be. So there is a scenario where I think you're simply entering into an agreement that says we're pushing these dollars over for this purpose, because the employee will not be an ACC Gov employee. The employee will be whomever you contract with in it. So no, I do not think the expectation is that that's a next year thing. It's fiscal year. I think it's in this calendar year that we're working through, once you all decide who it is that we're going to actually partner with.
With that fund, not general fund dollars.
Right, and they won't be our employee.
Okay.
That's doing that, so yes, yes.
All right, and so the next thing, is our budget goes into effect in July, right? Where are we with the ARPA dollars that we have given people, we didn't claw back?
Yes, so the next quarter is July, right? Ends in July.
August, September agenda report.
Yeah, so there'll be effectively one more time that we would come back and say, here's where we think performance is. Kind of the last opportunity is sort of claw back and reassign, if you will, because anything after that, as we get close to December, is going to have to, move into an account that's already open and we can immediately purchase them. So that's kind of the time frame associated with that.
And so one of the things that I was asking early on, while these dollars are still wherever they are, is there a line item or somewhere we can know what the interest is? As far as, because the interest, it does not have to go back or be clawed back. So is the interest somewhere?
Yeah, and we can break it out further. The interest is accounted for in the interest earned part of the budget and is already allocated into the general fund budget. But yes, we can take that interest earned line, if you will, that's in the budget and create the subcategories below it, because there's other things that we earn interest on also that we don't interest. Yeah.
Oh, I got Commissioner Lake, I got Dan Boyd covered. And we're gonna close.
Very short, I forgot.
Yeah, I just want to clarify when it comes to my concern about the CEP, I'm concerned about those family-friendly programs that don't serve alcohol. They're not focused on the alcohol consumption. You know, we've got the Hot Corner, Pride Fest, Latinx, Juneteenth. I want to see us have more events that attract families, because the families are the ones that are really cutting back on their expenses and not taking vacation. And afford the Six Flags tickets.
Yeah. Or even to go there.
Commissioner Davenport is.
Yeah, so just please staff don't highlight the difference from FY 26 and FY.
So what now?
Please don't highlight the difference. One of our commissioners, I think that's what she said, was highlight the difference between FY 26 and FY 27 changes. If I misinterpret that, I apologize.
They're on there.
Every change
Every time. But anyway, I would just like to request for $90,000 to designate. That's all.
He's got his a la carte menu.
Yeah, and I just want to, on the extra money, I just want to reiterate out loud, the money to up to the 4% raise, the 250 for the police,
Pension.
pension. And I also, you know, we have the fund balance, but I also want to put in the pitch and the reminder for that next year, we're gonna need some stuff for the East Side Library, and I was actually wondering if we could find out now if there's an anticipated number for my questions and answers of employees that would be needed next year, and what percentage are paid by state funds versus local funds, do they anticipate? So that we can at least have a little, you know, that's gonna have to be incorporated to the general budget, but we're gonna need that little extra next year.
And I just want to thank y'all. I want to close out and again, I need to highlight, I do want to, that you and Mayor and I met, talk about the enterprise fund. I think we really need to, let the community know how those funds work, so we need to at least have, one time talk about enterprise fund, how we use those dollars to do some of the things that we do and how those departments are not funded by general fund, we use enterprise fund to fund them. So I do want to have that conversation in this budget cycle.
Right?
Yeah, Mayor.
Right, everybody good?
Yeah.
All right, we will be here Thursday and
Long day,
talk
y'all.
about the judicial facility and then we're budget.
It's gonna be long.
And just
Is that why you're letting us out early to talk?
Y'all,
How about
y'all grown.
six?